Mother didn't know it was the center. But my grandmother, who knew everybody and everything, she was a big gossip, and so she knew everything going on. And she said, she turned to Mother, who she didn't like very much, and she said, well, Jane, there's some kind of spiritual center back there. I think you'd like that, which was meant to be an insult, not a compliment. So that was when my mother first became aware. And as long as you're asking, there's another beautiful piece of this that I usually don't get to say, so I'll say it. Mother, years before, in the early 50s, had a dream. And she remembers that she had seen some photograph in the paper, so it must have been 52 when Baba came to this country. And she has this kind of vague memory of this photograph. And that night she had a dream. And in the dream, she saw a fence. It was an unusual fence. And she was on one side of the fence, and on the other were all of these people, joyful and happy, and just, and you know, and Mother just said, long to be on that side of the fence. So that was 52. So fast forward to 57, and Elizabeth takes my mother for the first time when she goes to the center that day in 57 to see the center, you know, drive around, see everything. And they finally come over to the other side of the center. They stop in front of Baba's house. They get out, and Mother looks up, and there's the fence. It's the exact fence.
Was it the fence around Baba's house?
Around Baba's house. That was the fence of her dream.
Fantastic.
So
we all know, Charles, we all know Baba families and how Baba somehow takes with some members of the family and not with others. How was it with you and your sister? How was it that you came to just accept Baba, or was it a rocky road?
Oh, no. I recognized Baba the instant I walked in the lagoon cabin. Now, my mother did not, interestingly enough. Her inner experience of Baba came a few days later. I mean, she liked Baba, it was a warm, friendly, you know, all that, but she didn't feel that, you know, that inner recognition that she, I think, hoped she would feel. So that was her experience. Mine, by contrast, was just as soon as I crossed the threshold and ran into his arms, I knew. And I mean, it was as though I had seen him the day before. He was so familiar. He was so familiar that I didn't notice he was silent. If that makes sense. It just was, everything about him was natural and familiar, as though I'd always known him. He had always known me. And so from that moment on, you know, the feeling I had, which now I can articulate in words, but I'm sure I couldn't then at 8 years old, the feeling I had is, this is someone whose presence I never want to leave. Yeah.
So in that interim year, Charles, between your mother's first contact with Elizabeth and the center and Baba's arrival at the center, what were you told about Baba? What were your expectations? Had you already come to Baba in some inner sense, or was it really that first meeting?
It was that first meeting. You know, Elizabeth and Kitty, who became quickly our family and were so loving, so wonderful. Kitty taught me piano, or tried to, played games with us. Elizabeth, who we were calling Auntie Boo by that time, she asked us to call her Auntie Boo. She was my mother, my spiritual mother, and I loved her so much from the very moment I met her. But you know, they did not talk about Meher Baba as so much, really. I mean, I don't remember them doing that. That was not their way. Part of it was that Mother was still trying to figure out herself what this all meant. I mean, she loved Elizabeth and Kitty, and she wanted to be feel Baba. She wanted to have that experience, but she was still struggling with it. For example, Elizabeth gave her a number of photographs of Mayor Baba during that period, and Mother put them all away. She didn't put them up in the house, right? We didn't see them, except for one, and that was the beautiful image of Baba that Elizabeth took of Baba holding the lamb. So this is the only image that Mother had up in the house, and it was because it reminded her of Jesus. So we didn't know much in terms of information or framework, and Mother, I think, was not sure about it, and so she was so unsure about it. Not unsure is not quite the right thing. Well, it's hard to get inside what she was feeling, but I will say this: just before Baba came in 1958, Elizabeth told Mother, she said, "You're going to have to come. If you want to come, you have to come. You have to stay for the whole 2 weeks." And Mother was, of course, preparing to go and meet Baba, but she said, "Oh, well, no, that's a different story, Elizabeth. I mean, I have my theater. I'm the producer. I just can't walk away in 2 weeks, and so forth and so on and on. I'm not sure I can do that." And Elizabeth heard her out, as Andy Boo was very good at that, listening. Let her get it all out. And then at the end, Elizabeth looked at her and she said, "Well, Jane, what if it were true and you didn't go?" And somehow that struck Mother, and she said, "All right, I'll do it." But when she met Baba on May 19th, 1958, she did not take us to meet Baba. Now, maybe in the back of her mind, she thought, well, first of all, children were supposed to be in the playground being taken care of. They weren't supposed to be part of the gatherings and such. That's first of all. And in school, we were in school because we lived there. Secondly, I don't know, she was not quite sure. Should I take my children or should I expose them? I don't know what this is exactly. I don't know all of her thinking, but she did not take us. But when she met Baba, that first meeting, Baba said, among other things, he said, "Where are your children? I want to meet them." So one by one, we went. My brother the next day, the 20th, me the 21st, and then Wendy met Baba at Mother's Theater on the 22nd. So that's how, when I arrived at the Lagoon Cabin to meet Baba, I arrived with very little knowledge, as it were. I knew, of course, his name. I knew he was from India. I knew he was deeply special to Elizabeth and Kitty. I had been to the center. I'd seen the center, but I didn't get much information about it. But looking back, I realized that almost a year being around Elizabeth and Kitty was meeting Baba. They didn't have to say anything. Oh, there I am. There I am.
How many days later is this? This is not the day you met him. This is some days later. Is that correct?
Yes, a couple of days later. And this photograph is very special to me, of course, for a number of reasons. But the story behind it is that after meeting Baba that initial time, as I say, I only wanted to be near him. And I would wait outside wherever he was. I would try to intercept him if he were walking from this place to that. I would And I got used to, in those first couple of days, which seemed like a many years, really. You know, time with Baba stood still. It just seemed like forever. Anyway, I got very used to quickly Baba treating me with great love and care. In other words, when I would be near him, Baba would reach out and he would maybe touch my cheek or my chin or maybe pat me, something. And I felt that Baba and I had a very special relationship. I felt like we spoke to one another. I didn't really think about anyone else around. I wasn't even aware who was there. I forgot about my mother, my family. To me, it was just Baba and me. And honestly, I felt Baba was there for me. As a child, I guess you can have that feeling and not feel too selfish about it. But I did, and I felt like Baba, you know, wanted to be with me as much as I wanted to be with him. So this particular day, Baba gets out of the car that Elizabeth was driving, drove him up to the lagoon cabin, and he got out of the car. And Baba, I didn't realize how much Baba was suffering, you know, because I was a child. But of course, he had these sticks, and you can see the top of the stick just being behind Baba's shoulder there. But Baba was walking with help down the path from the car into the door of the lagoon cabin. And here I am standing on the path, waiting expectantly, because I know that when he walks by, he's going to stop and give me a pat or a touch, right? I know that's what's going to happen. So I'm all waiting and I'm all happy. And he comes by and then he goes completely past me. And my heart broke. It was that first experience of feeling ignored by Baba. And I didn't, without thinking, really, if I thought about it, even then I might not have done this, but without thinking, I reached out and I grabbed hold of his sadra, the hem of his garment. And I pulled on it. I tugged him. I hope not too hard. And Baba stopped, looked down, smiled, and then scooped me up in his arms. And that's this moment in the photograph.
Charles, you look like you're moved to tears here.
Well, I was. It was both joy. I mean, I was in anguish, and then suddenly he scoops me up, and I'm full of joy. And the only reason I have this photograph is I'm just going to call it a miracle. If Baba doesn't perform them, I'm just going to call it that anyway. Because my mother took this photograph, but she had taken many photographs during the Sahabas with this new camera she had. And mother is not very technically proficient, and I don't know, she didn't get the setting, or she didn't understand it, or she had her hand over the lens. I don't know what happened. When she went to develop the photographs after Baba left Myrtle Beach, none of them came out. They were all black, except for this one. So Baba gave it, you know, and he wanted me, I feel, to remember that moment forever. And never to let him get away with ignoring me. I mean, that's one lesson. And he responds to our hearts in every moment.
Charles, as you've said, you had only eyes for Baba. You were only aware of Baba in those moments that you were with him. But now, just for our edification and maybe for historical interest, can you identify some of the people in the photograph?
More or less, you know, not not really. I've always sort of had a problem with this because I really didn't pay any attention. But I think that's Henry's face peeking through there, and that's 3B dimple there with the pigtail.
Oh, 3B. Okay.
Yeah, that's 3B, and 3B and I actually became friends during this Sahaba, so that's how I remember her. And I think that's Liz Sakalas. Or is it Anne? Behind 3B. Huh? Oh, well, behind 3B.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And yes. And the others I'm not sure I see who anybody else in the picture I can recognize.
Well, from that same Sahavas in 1958, you have provided us with a couple of other photographs. Do you want to just say a couple of words as I scroll through them?
Sure, there's no such thing as a couple of words.
Please take all the time you want.
Well, I'm just saying, every photograph has a story, you know. Now in here you see Jean Shaw with the red dress on, right? And of course that's Naramandata Chanji. And that's me holding the door for Baba. And can you see, my gallery is covering Baba up, but Baba's looking at me. Can everybody else see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this moment was very important to me as well, because I seem to always have a kind of a look of anguish, but it's really joy. It's not anguish. Anyway, it's expectation. And of him coming nearer and nearer, you see. And so then he gets into the car. I discovered that if I opened and held the door for him and closed the door, that I would get extra attention. So that was one of my strategies. And Baba got into the car. Elizabeth was driving. And I'm standing at the window looking in. And maybe I do look like I was going to cry. Because Baba looked at me and then he gestured, "Come in, come in." And so I did. I sat down next to him in the car. So why don't you take this down, George, so they can see me, because I'm going to do a few gestures so they can see the story.
Yeah, I do have the record button on. It works as well as it does. Let's see how it comes out.
No. I mean, just if you could just remove the photograph for a moment.
Oh, okay. Just a moment. Let me do that.
Okay. So, because I wanted to sort of express
Yes.
what that moment was like when Baba gestured to me to come and get in the car, and he had to move to give me space to sit next to him. And now looking back, I realize how sweet and compassionate that was, and because Baba was in pain during that time. So he had to move over. And I didn't know this, or I would never have even thought of letting him do it, but he moved over. And you know, it was one of those old cars, it was an old Ford that has the hump in the middle. Do you remember those?
Yep.
Right? I guess whatever is in there, the axle or whatever you have in there. And so poor Baba moved over toward Elizabeth, and he had to put his feet up on that thing so that I could come and sit with him. So I get in the car, and this is the only time Baba left the center during the Sahavas. And it's the only time Elizabeth drove Baba on the highway since the accident in 1952.
Wow.
So she's driving, and we're going to my mother's theater to see a film that the Sufis had taken in 1956 and they wanted to show it to Baba, and there was no place appropriate at the center, so my mother offered her theater like that, the Shrine Club. And so she was going, we were all going to see the movie. And on the way, as we were driving out of the center, for some reason, it pops out of Kitty, and I don't know, you know, Kitty could be very spontaneous and unpredictable, and she's sitting in the back, I think with Nariman and Erich, I don't remember, and she's sitting in the back, and it pops out of Kitty, oh, yes, their father, he was here. And it turns out Dad had come to the center. He did not meet Baba, but he had seen Baba from a distance. He had come to pick up my brother to take him somewhere. And he saw Baba from a distance. As Erich would say, that was his portion. And Kitty was all excited about this because she thought, well, maybe, you know, Jane and Charles, my father, will get back together. And Baba turned, and this is unusual because I'm in the car. I don't know how this conversation took place in front of me, but anyway, Baba turned so he's facing me, but so that Kitty could see his gesture, and he goes like this. No. In other words, no. They're meant to be apart. And then Kitty, you know Kitty, she was so, she would say what she was thinking, right, sometimes. And she said, oh, yes, well, oh, don't they need their father? And Baba looked at her, and he looked right at me, and he smiled, and he said, I am their father. So that's what that picture reminds me of, is that moment.
That's quite a story. And you're right, there are no few words. I'm sure you could go on and on. You have provided us with some other photos, and you know, perhaps now scrolling forward, I guess, in time to 1962. Is that November?
Yes, November, the East-West Gathering, exactly, right. This is actually the last day of the East-West Gathering, the last day of Darshan. And now here, of course, I'm 13 years old, so I do remember more of the people. And behind Baba is Elizabeth, my Auntie Boo. And of course, there's Ivy Deuce in the red sweater and Marvin Campen kneeling. There's Jenny and Michael LePage, the children. There's Larry Karash standing in front of me. Ruth Ringer next to Larry, and then my sister Wendy. In the foreground, Julia Mavris. And then just behind Ivy, or just to the side of Ivy, is Margaret Krask. And behind her is Henry Kashouty. And then there's Erwin Locke just behind my sister, just behind her head. Anyway, so those are some of the people there. Baba, there's many stories connected with this picture. So go to the next one then.
Okay.
It's kind of a follow-up. So this is after we went outside because Baba wanted his brother Behram to have the opportunity to take a film of Baba with all of us, the Westerners. And so that's why we went outside and we sat in the Guru Prasad garden, as you saw, and we looked kind of stiff, as you can see. So at one point, Baba said, you know, this is a movie, so you can move, right? So Baba began to gesture, and we all sort of moved at that point. So now we're walking back in. Lud Dimple and Marvin Campen are helping Baba walk. My brother is actually leaning on the balcony, looking at Baba, my brother John. So now we go back inside to really have our final time with Baba, right? This is the morning session of Westerners, final day of the Sahabas. So this is our final time.
Shall I scroll forward, Charles?
No, why don't you take
Stop share?
Yeah, stop share for a minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
So what to say about that final time? The challenge is, do you want the full story or not? Yes, somebody they're saying, yeah, okay, cheering me on. All right, well, listen, many of you have heard this, as you've heard many of my things over the years, but I don't mind, and it's all right. And the reason I feel this way, and I'm sure many of you feel this way, every story of Baba, every time it's told, I feel it's new. Because those times with Baba then are now. What he was doing, what we call then, he did in the now. Because Baba said, in 58, he told us, he said, you know, I'm paraphrasing, he said, yesterday we had a party with the children, tomorrow we'll have a program. But Baba said, but really not, it's not that, it's all now. From his experience, it's all now. So in the now, he did these things that we think of as happening a long time ago, as happening over time. And what's extraordinary to me about Baba and life with Baba is that over our experience of time, what happened then comes to light. And we see it was meant for another time and another time and another time. And so to me, all of the stories of Baba are imbued with that timelessness because they will speak to someone sometime, somewhere, and the recognition will come. So that's why these stories, yes, you know, I've been telling stories of Baba that I had in my childhood for a long time. But, you know, every time it seems new to me too. So with that introduction, we go back in and what happens, and we all sit back down. My sister and I cluster up next to the sofa, next to Baba's knee. Everybody takes their place. And to understand what happens next, I have to tell you, and many of you know this, that one of the things I took with me to India in 1962 and was one of the longings was I would love to touch his feet. And in 1958, there was not that opportunity. It just didn't seem natural. Maybe somebody did, some people did, I don't know. But for me as a child who was trying to not interfere, not get in the way, because you know what? All the other children were at the playground. And I just refused to go. And so it was special dispensation for me to be around. I even got to go to the barn one day, and no child went to the barn. But I pushed my way in. So I was trying to be extremely careful and good so that I wouldn't lose that privilege. But there was no chance to touch his feet. The closest I came was sitting in that theater the day we went to the Mother's Theater, and his feet crossed like this, were right next to me where I was seated. And I had this kind of urge to reach over but I didn't. You know, I didn't want to disturb Baba. So 4 years later, when we went to India for the East-West Gathering, that was in my heart, you know, I mean, it wasn't the only thing, but it was something down deep inside. If I only have an opportunity, I want to touch his, I want so much to touch his feet. Well, there was no opportunity. You know, some Easterners were able to do that and all that, and I probably could have. But again, being very careful about not disturbing Baba, not doing something that would displease Baba, I didn't, you know, insert myself or try, and we would embrace Baba if we greeted Baba. It wouldn't be touching his feet, at least for most of the Westerners, I'm sure. I mean, maybe we're exceptions. So you have to understand that's what, and I wasn't thinking that on the last day, but it was that unfulfilled heart longing that, you know, I had somewhere deep inside. So Baba sat down back on the sofa. We all sat. And suddenly Erich calls out, "Charles," like that. And I'm startled, but I immediately think, oh, he must mean Purdom. Because Baba and I didn't talk like that. You know, it was just an inner thing. And when Baba usually said Charles, it was something about Purdom and his work on the book and so forth and so on. So I didn't, you know, think of any, my immediate reaction was Purdom, but I look up and Erich is looking at me. And then I look over at Baba and Baba's looking at me. So I said, "Yes, Erich." And he said, "Charles, Baba wants you to remove his sandals." And I knew, you know, I knew that he knew. So typical of Baba, you know, Baba never would say, "Oh, I know you want to remove, you know, touch my feet." Baba's never like that. It was always something very natural, something as though he didn't know. That's how he was. So of course I went down immediately and I lifted each foot at a time. Believe me, I took my time. And I slipped off his sandal. And then I held his foot for a moment and put it down. And then I picked up the other foot. I slipped off the sandal. I held his foot for a second, and then I put it down. And you know what went through my head at that moment was the biblical verse from John the Baptist. "I am not fit to remove his sandals." And if John the Baptist felt that way, you can imagine how I felt. So then it's time to say goodbye, to get the final embrace. And you know, I felt, and Baba also said this, but you never knew with Baba, but he did say this will be the last time, and you will see me in this form. So this was the final embrace. And we all get up to get in line for that last embrace, and I don't want it. I do, but I don't. And I feel great pain and great joy at the same time. And I hang back, uncharacteristic, instead of trying to be the first, push my way forward, which was my way with Baba, I hung back and let everybody else go. And as I was hanging back, Mani peeks through the curtain behind Baba. Now, you know, the women Mondley didn't come out and participate. And of course, men, we never saw Mira. Of course, I met Mani, saw Mani, but she didn't come out into the gathering. But they would peek through the curtain and to see what was happening. So she peeks through the curtain, and I look up, and I see Mani's face, and she goes, "Come here," like this. So I go behind the sofa where Baba is seated embracing people. I go behind. And Mani says to me, Baba wants to give you a gift. Wendy got a little garland. My brother got a box of candy on his birthday when we first arrived. So Mani said, they have something. Baba wants to give you a gift. And then she took out this photograph of Baba. And she said, this is from Baba to you. And she said, I put it in plastic so that he would be the last one to touch it. And then she turned it over and she said, he has signed it for you. And she said, now that is very special because Baba no longer is signing. She said, it will be with you always. And the footnote to that story, which is really part of the great theme of life with Baba for me, how Baba responds to our heart. He doesn't read our minds, he responds to our heart, and he finds a way to let us know he knows our heart. So I kept the picture, of course, and treasured it. And one day after Baba dropped the physical body, and was in India, early 70s, I was in Pandi's studio, which many of you I'm sure remember. And you go there because all the photographs Pandi had of Baba, you know, that you didn't see anywhere else. And we would go through them all. It was just a treasure trove, and we'd come out with all these photographs. And as I was going through them, I found this picture, the original version, which I'd never seen before. But it wasn't just Baba. It was, you can see in the picture that Baba's shoulder is up as though someone's next to him. And so this is the full picture. Baba with Ali Shah, one of his favorite musts, right? We could do a whole evening on Ali Shah, we won't. But so Ali Shah, and he was always my favorite also. And I thought, oh, isn't that wonderful to finally have the full picture of the photo that Baba gave me. And then I go back to the United States, and sometime later I'm reading the Wayfarer's supplement, and I notice where Baba was on my birthday. It was during the Great Seclusion. And in the Great Seclusion, as you know, Baba was in the blue bus, and this was preparation for the new life. And but he stepped out of that part of the seclusion and went to Pune for a short time, several days, and then came back. And so the Wayfarers mentioned this. They mentioned it because during that time, on July 22nd, 1949, which was the day I was born, Baba was working with Ali Shah. And it's just, you know, just a little way that Baba has of saying, I know. I know. And never forget that it's all my plan. Never forget, it is all my plan. So then, reluctantly, I go up to Baba, and Baba says, he looks around, you know, because he knows that some of us have been hanging back from embracing, and he says, so everyone is embraced, it's finished, I'm gonna go. And then the few of us who had held back rushed forward and to get our final embrace. And he said a number of things after we all had had our embrace. And we were sitting in front of him, and one thing I remember is that he turned to my mother and he said, who was over his shoulder, and he said, "Don't be nervous. Don't be afraid. I'll always be with you." And at one point he turned to everyone, and among the things he said was, "I am the Christ. Open your eyes and you will see me as I really am." And then Baba got up, started to get up like this as though to go. And then he fell back into the sofa. And he looked up at Erich, helpless. And he said, gestures to Erich, and Erich looks at me and he says, "Charles, Baba wants to know, where are his sandals?" They had been pushed under the sofa, and with all the people coming forward, so Baba couldn't leave, right? He had no sandals. So of course I scramble back down, and yet again, Baba gives me that opportunity to touch his feet. The last time I will touch Baba, because there's a postscript about seeing Baba, but this is the last time I will touch his physical body, were the feet, and slipping those sandals on his feet. And then he got up to leave. And, you know, sometimes Baba could look, to me, very big and powerful. And other times he looked childlike and fragile. And on this day, to me, he looked fragile in his little coat and his white garment. And as he walked out, the little ribbon tied around his hair in the back, and he slowly made his way out. And I felt at that moment, watching him walk out the room, I felt, yes, yes, he is the Christ.
What a beautiful story, Charles. Thank you so much.
So that's another example of how a picture is is worth 1,000 words. Oh, Baba, there he is. So this is the postscript I mentioned. You see, so Baba being so gracious and loving. Baba said that was it. We would see him no more. And many people left or had to leave. My brother went back to school and so forth. Some of us lingered on to go to Meherazad and Meherabad. Baba wanted us to go and see his tomb shrine. He wanted us to go to Meherazad and see where he lived and all that. He wasn't there, of course. But so we stayed a few extra days. We were limited in our stay in India to 7 days. I think it was a week by Baba's order. So, but some of us took the full 7 days. And just, it was on, so the Sahavas ended what, November 5th, I think? And then anyway, maybe it was a little over 7 days he said we could stay. But anyway, this is November 10th. And November 10th, word comes to all of our hotels where we're staying. And the word is, Baba says, anyone who would like to can come to Bun Gardens and wave goodbye. Say goodbye. Because he was going to leave Pune and he was going to stop at this tree where he usually did, one of Babajan's trees. He would stop there, and then he would go on to Meherazad.
Oh, this photograph is in the Bund Garden?
Yes.
I see. Thank you.
So this is when we of course, were thrilled because this was a very joyful time, particularly joyful because we had already cried. We had already said farewell to that form. We had already had our last embrace. And for me, this was just pure joy. And, just a gift, a special gift. And so, as you can see, some Easterners and some Westerners are there. And if you look over to one side, you'll see my little blonde head kneeling there on one side. And, to the left of Baba, no, to the left of me watching this. And then Wendy just more in the foreground with long blonde hair. You can see the back of her head. And
Charles, I'm sorry, I can't pick you out. Can you just tell us one more time where you are?
I'm the handsome kids in the, no, I'm the blonde. You know the people in white? All the people in white?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's my head right under them.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're all seated. Baba had told us, this isn't a time for, we're not going to have questions or anything. Baba just said just to be with him for a short time, and then he would leave. But in the middle of the time, and I don't know how long it was, we're just all sitting, and I guess everyone's doing what I'm doing, drinking Baba in, and thrilled at this extra opportunity. And Baba looks over and finds me in the crowd, and he says, he gestures to me and he says, "Where is your mother?" And I didn't know. That whole East-West gathering, I barely had any awareness of where she was. And I certainly didn't know it at that moment. All attention on Baba. And so I look around to see if I can find mother for Baba. But before I do, Baba says, "That's all right." And he sees her, and she's standing just on the edge of the crowd there, and with Elizabeth on one side and Kitty on the other. And Baba points to them, to the three of them, to my mother, and he does this. And just to say, not long after we come back from India, everything changes in Mother's life. And her life becomes more and more oriented to serving Baba directly. The World's Fair project comes along, and then she feels that it's time to go to the center, and Baba wants her to go and help Elizabeth and Kitty. So that was the foreshadowing of the next chapter for her. And then Baba gets in the car to go. And of course, now the great scramble to get one last glimpse, one last time and near him. And so George, you can show the next one because that shows the scene of us scrambling to get near the car. There we are. So you can see, I think you can see on the right of the picture, that I am pushing towards the car, as is everyone else. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. I am pushing towards the car, somewhat anxious that I won't get to the window before the car breaks through the crowd and Baba is gone forever. So it's one of those moments where someone's, as you can see, trying to keep the crowd back so the car can go through. And everyone wants to do, I guess, what I want to do, and that is get to the door and get to the window. And just before the car breaks through the crowd, I make it to the I make it to the window. And I look at Baba, he looks up at me, and he says, makes this gesture, this. Oh, I'm sorry, you have to, he makes this gesture, which actually he did in 58 and 62. Nearly every time he saw me, Baba would point to me and go like this. So I mean, it was never interpreted. I always felt like it meant, Baba, I'm pleased, or I love you, I'm pleased. I don't know. Elizabeth told me some years later that she feels Baba means become perfect in my love. I love that. Become perfect in my love. It's like a vision of what life can be. Or become whole is another way of putting it, in my love. Become whole in my love. And then he did this gesture, and then he did this. But he looked very serious. He pointed at me emphatically. Be happy. And I have to say, one of the most difficult orders Baba can give. But nevertheless, it's what pleases him.
Charles, I think I speak for many of the people on our call when I say I'm getting drunk on these stories.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. There are a couple of other photos that I'd like to ask you about. Oh, maybe that was it. I'm sorry. I think that was all you gave me. Am I right?
I think so.
Yeah. In the tradition of our study meetings, I asked you to choose a passage, and you had one ready to mind. Usually we have a reading of a discourse, but in this case, you just had an excerpt, a one-line excerpt from the divine response. Now, we, of course, are very eager to hear what you have to say about it. Would you like me, or would you like to read the whole divine response, or do you want to just focus down on that one excerpt?
It's however you like. I mean, that was what I had focused on, but the whole discourse is beautiful too. So.
And it's not too long, so if everyone will bear with me, or unless you have a copy of it right in front of you, Charles, and then you could read it.
Well, I do, if you want me to.
Okay, please do. Please do.
All right. Everything and the Nothing is my very favorite book, period, but especially among Baba's books. It's the later Meher Baba, right? And he was preparing he gave these discourses in his later years, and then he gave them over to Francis to have published. And he told us about this at the East-West Gathering. He said that these would be something great for people in the future. And truly so. I mean, I think these are the most profound discourses. Baba says, the moment you try to understand God rather than love him, you begin to misunderstand him, and your ignorance feeds your ego. Mind cannot reach that which is beyond it. God is infinite and beyond the reach of mind. The divine will that brought forth this infinite illusion expresses itself in all its purity through me to make you turn away from illusion toward God consciousness. And here are the two lines that I picked out. Every moment I respond to the whole of creation. My response, being divine, is wholly from love. That's kind of the life story of Baba and my life with him right there. The many faces of that one response as you see them are but reflections of your many mirrored mind. You view and judge my actions from your level of understanding and attempt to differentiate them in light of your own limited standards of values. And so you misinterpret the different shades of my response to different people. Being unlimited, I am simultaneously on all levels of consciousness, and as such, in my response, I differentiate one from the other solely in light of the impressions, or the different states of consciousness that the impressions give rise to. Each action of mine is a response in accordance with the necessity of the recipients on various planes of consciousness. And so by its very nature and magnitude, my divine response sometimes appears enigmatic. Do not try with your limited mind to understand the significance
Where's
of
Ryan? Ryan, where are you going?
nor
Let me mute
Cameron,
all and
never
then
let him pass this driveway.
hold on.
self-truth. There we go. Okay. Do not try with your limited mind to understand the significance of my actions, nor try to imitate them. You must not do what I do, but do what I tell you to do. To try to bring my every action within the orbit of your understanding is but to understand the limitations of your own understanding. At times when I see you confused, I am moved by my compassion and love for you to give you an explanation of the reason for particular action of mine. And so it seems that I am defending my actions by giving explanations for them. And thus is shown your weakness and my strength. But remember that despite my explaining the significance of my actions, they will ever remain beyond the range of your knowing. The utter simplicity of my divine game appears to be highly intricate as soon as you try to understand it through your intellect. The more you have of my company and receive of my love with an open heart, the more wholeheartedly you begin to accept me. And the more you see of me, the more convinced you become that you understand me less and less. Boy, that's true. Exerting yourself to comprehend my divine game through the process of understanding opens up vast fields of speculation in which you wander and arrive sooner or later at a dead end, finding yourself hopelessly lost. If my actions cause confusion, it is because of your lack of complete trust. Therefore, uproot all doubt and remember well that whatever I do is for the best. All my actions are my divine response, born of my divine love.
Where was that? Where was that from?
That's from the Everything in the Nothing.
Which?
Page, well, on the old edition, it's page 31, but the editions change some the date. So it's number 28 in the Everything and the Nothing. The 28th discourse.
The
Called Divine
divine
Response.
response?
Yes.
It's a file.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the reason I picked out the two lines is because in recent times, those two lines have become like a mantra in my life. Every moment I respond to the whole of creation. My response, being divine, is wholly from love. And becoming aware of that in this time, or keeping that in front of me, has been a tremendous help, a support, an inspiration. And then I thought, in thinking about stories of Baba and his life, how many stories, and maybe I'm just because I'm seeing it through this lens at this moment, but how many stories of Baba in his lifetime were his way of saying that, or his way of saying for all time, when you hear and tell these stories, you will know that in every moment I am responding with divine love. You know, back in the day, and some of us are old enough to remember back in the day, that is before the internet, we really didn't have analogies in human life, in the gross world, for how, you know, how is it possible for God or the avatar to respond simultaneously to all of life, much less all people, much less all of us? You know, how is that? We didn't have an analogy, especially in the West, where our ideas of God are really fairly limited, you know. So how to think about it. But now with Siri, we know, we have an analogy, right? I mean, Siri came along and we know Siri can respond to everybody, millions of us simultaneously. And so Baba's like the divine Siri, because Baba doesn't respond with what we want. You know, you ask Siri to do this or to play that or for this. Baba responds with what we need. So there is that big difference. But it's the for our little human mind to be able to somehow envision or grasp how universal mind can respond all to the time in every moment, Baba says. He doesn't just say when he's once in a while or when God thinks about it. No, every moment he responds not just to some in creation, not just to human beings, but to the whole of creation. I think that's one of the most extraordinary things Baba has ever given, and at least for me, a tremendous comfort in daily life. So I don't know, should I tell, there's stories connected with this, but I don't want to, what do you think, George? George is muted, so he can't tell me what he thinks. Yeah, people, Chris, my husband says people might want to ask questions, so.
Yeah, and but do tell us at least one story connected with it. And I just wanted to say, in response to what you just said, that I can see how this is a tremendous comfort in a time as fraught as the one we're living through right now.
But you know, yes, I can tell a story, but I'd like to, I think Christopher's right. Let's just check in and see if people want to
Okay.
make a comment.
If anyone wants to ask a question,
give an answer, it's all right.
Yeah, please unmute yourself and ask your question, and then mute yourself again so that we can have a minimum of echo and feedback.
Hi, Jay Baba, everyone.
Jay Baba.
Jay Baba Charles, it's Matt in New York. How are you?
Fine.
Great to see you, really.
Good to see you too.
Charles, I'm when you're reading from, my question is this: when is the experience that we received, many of us on this chat, of Baba's love directly from those who either met him or you met, or those who met his mom, when his word, you know, I always say it's his presence, and then it's his words. You know, we have the discourses, but when his experience in our hearts, those who met him, when because it was tactile, it was a physical, and it's like when you have a parent who was in the war and all that generation is gone, you don't have the same sort of connection. So I was wondering how you feel about that. And also I was wondering if you felt that your connection was upheld your mother's connection or helped her connection with Baba, or in what way, or vice versa.
Well, you know, it was such clearly a great blessing to be with Baba in the form. But I think, as everyone here knows, and probably feels in different ways in their hearts, I think all who recognize him were with him at one time in human form. So the recognition comes from, yes, that's a very important part. Or as Elizabeth said when Mother said something about how, how fortunate we are that in this time we know of Meher Baba. And she said, well, perhaps we were in the crowd when he passed by as Jesus. That's enough. A glimpse is enough. A touch is enough. And it reverberates and reverberates through lifetimes and lifetimes and is never forgotten. Baba says in the Everything and the Nothing, he says, I'm introduced to you many times and you go away and forget, but you're not new to me, he says. I'm paraphrasing. There's no introduction to me. And so when there's this recognition now, or after he dropped the body, it's because of that accumulation of experience with him that we have that recognition, whether we were with him in the body or not. And honestly, not to, I don't want to diminish. It always feels a little awkward because I say, well, of course, I don't want to take away from the great thing. But the reason I have the stories and I had that experience was that they would be something Baba would work through. But not because it made me recognize him in a way that other people wouldn't, who didn't have in this lifetime, his physical presence. I once asked Erich, I said, Erich, just before Baba, in this last couple of years, 67, 68, like that, Baba, there were so many people who longed to see him in the West, people who had just come to him, right? People who just wanted that 5 minutes, just to see him. And I said, and Baba didn't. And I said, Erich, their longing was so great that why didn't Baba see some of these people? And Erich looked at me and he said, that's why. He said, the longing is so much greater than anything he could have given in his form. And he said, when people came to see Baba towards the end, Baba said, go to Hamirpur if you want to see me. So there is the love for me there. You will experience me there. So, I feel very deeply that Baba meets each of us personally, intimately, in the way that gives us the recognition. And if it were any other way, the recognition wouldn't be there. Honestly, folks, I don't want to say, but I mean, it's not, There were people who met Baba. There were people who saw Baba many times and had no recognition, or very little. And Baba, nice man and all that. So Baba told Mani after someone left, you know, and Baba just said, what can I do? No connection. So it's the connection. And that comes from lifetimes. Lifetimes. And I know many of you well enough to know that many of you have known, I feel, have known him a very, very long time. There are people in my life who love Baba, who didn't meet him physically, who inspire me and bring me closer to him by their conviction about him, by their love for him, that is just, I mean, it's more than and there's some on this call in that category. And so that's how I know by experience that, yes, it was a blessing, but my brother in 58 did not have any recognition. It was only in 62. So it's all the timing. And that timing is perfect. About mother, you know, we helped each other. We were very close. I was there when she had her recognition of Baba. And it wasn't in his physical form. It was in the middle of the night. And she woke up. And I, all the way in another part of the house, woke up simultaneously. And went through the house to her bedroom and found her weeping uncontrollably. And I said, Mother, what's wrong? And she couldn't speak. And she later told me that she had awakened in the middle of the night and she had this smell of jasmine in her room. And she began to weep. No, she heard, I should say that. She woke up, she heard her name called, Jane. And she woke up and she smelled the jasmine. And then she began to weep. And then she fell into deep sleep. And the next morning she woke up and she was transformed. And she rushed to get to the center as soon as possible. I finagled my way to go with her. So the two of us went. My siblings went off to school. And we stood outside the barn because now she was waiting for him in a whole new way. And he came from the car being carried in the chair by the dancers. And as he passed my mother in the crowd, he stopped the chair. He turned to her and he said, Jane, Baba wants to know, how did you sleep? How did you sleep? And then he went on into the barn. And then during the time in the barn, Baba gave a discourse on deep sleep. And he said that in deep sleep we return to God, but then we don't remember when we wake up, but that's where we get renewed. And then he left the barn, got in the chair again, and started through the crowd. And again, he stopped the chair. he looked over and picked Mother out of the crowd. And he said, "Jane, Baba wants to know, how did you sleep?" And then he looked at her, and she felt as though Baba were looking at her directly in the eyes for the first time. And she heard inwardly, she says, as clear as a bell, she heard, "Yes, Jane, it is I." And so,
Dear Charles, it's wonderful to see you again. Charlie Fastenau.
hi, Charlie.
Hi, good to see
Nice
you.
to see you too.
I was just going to say that when I also love the everything and the nothing in the section which says that my response being divine is wholly from love. Every time I hear that, this Baba's face comes and says, "Will you please just learn to trust me?" Just trust me. And I'm finding now, the older I get, that that's becoming at least a little bit easier, because whenever I decide not to do that, everything falls apart. But I really wanted to say hello to you and Christopher. And we're moving to Asheville, incidentally, July 1st, so we get to see you soon.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Good to see you, and thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you, Charlie. So good to see you.
Thank you.
Charles, it's
Yes.
Judy from
Hi,
Seattle.
Judy.
Hello, and thank you for your sharings today. I'm wondering if there's any way you can express how your love is different for Baba from the time when you were actually able to be with him physically, and then after he dropped his body. Of course, you were growing and maturing during those years. But is there any way to even express that difference? Since most of the audience today, I'm assuming, is like me, that didn't physically meet Baba in this body. And so we don't have that possibility of even speaking about it. I don't know if it's possible, but I offer that as a, can you?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, what Elizabeth said to me, what Annie Booth said to me, it's so true. Well, she didn't say it to me, actually, she said it to her minister, who came to console her after Baba dropped the body. By the way, Annie Boo always corrected me when I said Baba dropped the body. She'd say, "Oh, you mean he dropped the physical body?" I said, "Yes, Annie Boo, that's what I mean." Anyway, after he dropped the physical body, her minister, the Methodist minister in town where she went to church, and she and I would go together and all that. Anyway, Dr. DeBose came, like ministers are supposed to, he had heard about this and he wanted to come and offer his condolences and all that. So he was sitting there in the living room. She calls me over because minister means she wants me to be there and so forth. So I'm there. And he says, "Well, Mrs. Patterson, I heard about Mayor Baba's passing, and I just want you to know how deeply sorry I am and offer my sympathy." And he said, I know you must miss him a lot." And she looked up, with that kind of surprised face you get, and she said, oh no. You see, he's so much more available now. And that's been my experience, actually. Baba was not Baba. That is to say, Baba is so beyond Baba. And so, yes, discourses are there, films, photographs, being with him in the body. Mandali people, the center, all of those are wonderful clues or hints or the scent, if you will, of him. It's wonderful things, but they're not Baba. His body was not Baba. You know, Baba told my mother when he first met her, I am not this body. First thing he told her, I am not this body. So when he left that body, which was a beautiful thing to see and to be with, no doubt, for those who Baba allowed to see that it was a beautiful thing, right? I mean, if he allowed you to experience that, just like he allows some of you to experience something great in the Samadhi, he allows some of you to experience something great in Mandali Hall or at the center. Baba allows that. Others go and they, you know, it's nice and it's pretty and all that. They don't feel that. But if he allows it, if he unveils and says, here I am, whether it's in his body or in a place or even through his words, right? Then, of course, that fragrance comes, that recognition comes. But in my experience, it's been liberating to grow in intimacy with my Baba. My Baba isn't the only Baba, right? And very limited, but it's my Baba. And so rather than growing in relation to him sitting in India or from reading a book or being with Mandali people, I have come to grow being with him intimately as my Baba. People say, well, then you can just, he could be anything. Yes, he can be anything. That's why nobody has a monopoly and nobody's closer or further away because he's in here. But, you know, the old idea is, well, some are closer or some understand him better or, you know, his words are this or that. And then Mandali said this and, you know, so-and-so. But that's not Baba in my experience. I'm just speaking for myself. That's not Baba. And this is the only other thing I'll say about that, because it comes from Erich, who had much wisdom on all of these things. After all the upheaval at the center in 1994, after Christopher and I went through all of that, my mother went through all of that, as you know. And so, you know, we were in the midst of it, 94, 95. Someone brought back a message from Erich to me. It was an oral message because he wasn't about to write it down. In those days, anything you wrote down, then it would be circulated and all that. So he didn't do that, but he gave it orally. And it was a very simple thing. So someone came to me and said, Erich wants you to know. He said, tell Charles, Meher Baba's work is greater than Meher Baba. Tell them. Liberating. The work of transforming consciousness beyond our comprehension, but there's no limit to it. Baba, we limit. And out of necessity, you know, I mean, we're human. But Annie Boo always said to me when I was young, she said, Charles, remember this. Everyone tries to limit Baba, but no one can limit Baba. So my Baba is not the Baba, but he's my Baba. And after he left the physical form, it was really, you know, and honestly, even after some of the Mandali left the scene, it freed me up more and more to grow closer and closer to my Baba and not filter it through something else. Does that speak to what you were asking, Judy?
Beautifully, yes, thank you. And I just want to say how amazed I am at how strongly I feel Baba on this time together with all of us here with you. It's as if literally we are in the same room together. It's amazing what technology can do.
Yes, it is. And what Baba can do.
Exactly.
Charles,
Hey,
this-
Alan. Alan, you have your quarantine mustache.
I do.
You're looking really good.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. You
a
too.
young photograph of Baba could be.
That would be lovely.
That's what he's going for.
That's what I'm going for. Hopefully I can grow it out more. Yeah, on the topic of you saying, my Baba, I'm just curious, how do you communicate with Baba now? And how does Baba communicate with you?
Well, I lean on Elizabeth so much in my life so that I always go back to that. And now that I've put it down in a book, I suppose I can't keep repeating it because everybody will admit I'm going to keep repeating it anyway. But she taught me, she gave me a way to communicate with him every day. And because when I was quite young, I asked her something like what you asked me. I think I framed it more, how do you know what Baba wants of you each day? I mean, how do you know what to do and all that for Baba and all that? What direction to take? And she said, well, each morning I take time to listen to Baba in silence. And she said, prayer is speaking to Baba, but meditation in silence is listening. So I listen, and then she says, and I ask him, what does he want from me? Now, she said, he doesn't answer in so many words. That was typical of her. He doesn't answer in so many words, but the day becomes the answer. And so part of my practice is to find time to listen, and then to be alert to what he's saying in each thing that happens during the day. If I'm really do it well, and I don't every day, and I often fail, but when I'm doing it well, I'm really communicating with Baba all day. Because Baba is speaking through the people I encounter. Baba is speaking through the events, good, bad, and ugly. Baba is speaking all the time. There's something. His response of love is there all the time in everything that happens. And it is for me to listen and then wait to see what he says. And it's a constant communication. If I keep aware of it, which I don't all the time, but when I do, it's a constant source of communication with Bob.
Charles, this is George. You have recently come out with a book about Elizabeth. Could you just say a few words about that? The more I listen to your stories, such as the last little vignette that you told us, the more eager I am to read it.
Aha. Oh, good. You haven't read it. Well, that's good. I mean, I say that's good because I'm glad that I'm not telling you something you just read. Well, it was such a joy to write. It was, it's a little teeny book. And this is Elizabeth. And it's really not my book at all, and it's not about me, and it's not about, actually, it's not really about Elizabeth, in my view. It's really about Baba, because, you know, I didn't have much time with Baba physically, very, very little. I tried to take advantage of every moment I had, I will say that, and Baba, that's grace. I mean, why would an 8-year-old do that unless it were a gift? So I don't credit myself as a child, but Baba wanted it. He wanted that, but I didn't live with him. I wanted to live with him. I told him that, but I didn't. So I lived with her, or was in her life as family for 23 years. And that was like, for me, learning his ways, his scent, you know, what seems right, what seems authentic. So to the degree I can recognize anything like that now in life, it's really that example of Elizabeth, who was very close to him, but also, you know, just learned so much from him in his presence. So in other words, when I sat down to write that, and I limited the book to only the things that I heard and experienced with Elizabeth in her presence, you know, I don't tell her life story, or an introduction, I give an overview, but I don't try to do everything. I try only those things that have shaped my life. And it was such a joy to write, because what happened was that Baba came through every bit of it for me. Elizabeth wasn't there. And that's true of Elizabeth. She was transparent to Baba. I mean, of course, she was a human being and she had her limitations, but in my experience of her, she and Kitty both were people who, because they never put themselves first, and not just trying not to put themselves first like I do, you know, it's an effort. For them, it was just breathing. It was always putting Baba first. What would Baba want? What would please Baba? And when I wrote all those things down that she said, her wisdom and her humor, it was clear to me that that's how I got to know Meher Baba.
Other questions for Charles Haynes?
I'd like to just say thank you. It's been so rich and wonderful. I've really looked forward to tonight. You and Baba have a special place in my heart, because I was actually in a friend's office and I saw this photo, and I'm sure you've probably seen that. That photo is that even in, maybe it's in one of my books, but anyway, maybe you know where that photo is from, but I should know that. But that photo literally stopped me in my tracks, and I recognized him. And over about a period of a decade, Baba just systematically, slowly churning in intensity and intensity and intensity until I just couldn't stand it anymore, and I had to know more about him. And one of my friends, you may know him, his name's Philip White. He's been around a lot of you guys. I'm pretty sure you've probably met before. But he said that this book was a great primer for Baba. And I read this book and I wandered around downtown Tulsa and near Prague, Oklahoma, and an hour away from there. And I just fell in love with him. And I loved what you were saying, and what I've also heard from a couple of others about, you know, this my Baba thing. Like, even as I am sitting here, and I'm going to try to say this without sounding arrogant, but even as I'm sitting here hearing these amazing stories of you with Baba, there's still this I don't believe in specialness, because I do believe Baba's message was that we are Baba, and it's like we got to get out of the way so he can become us and we become him that way. But there is almost this like, yeah, it's wonderful, but it's not my Baba, right? Like, I know Baba like even better than this guy who like grew up with him, and I've never met him in the physical, you know. But it's so personal and just on a daily basis. So I was going to ask also the question of how do you communicate with him now, but that got answered. But it's changed everything. My whole life. I drank, I did drugs, I did all these things, and he just put an absolute stop to all of that in my life. It was an affront to every dysfunctional pattern of my personality, which was hard at first to get to know him, because he attacks so directly on the ego. I don't know if attack is the right word, but he just penetrates just so directly into what is not that I believed was, that it just shattered. And I don't remember where the story came from, but I love, you know, I don't promote Baba. He is definitely, if somebody asks about him, great. But a lot of times too, I feel like, for lack of a better word, I'm channeling him or whatever, because I like when I'm almost every difficult situation I encounter now, I just get out of the way. I'm like, tell me, you know, and he comes through. And sometimes if I use a quote or something and I can see it like profoundly impacted somebody, I'll say, oh, well, Mayor Baba said that. But a lot of times I'll check in with him after I do something he wants me to do, and I can really feel that Nazar connection. And I'm like, do I need to give you credit or something? He's like, yeah, just it's all good, you know? So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Ben. That's so beautiful. And thank you for sharing your story. I couldn't help but think when you were talking about the specialness thing, how that would please Bob. Bob would say, that's right. You know, because, you know, Baba doesn't want us to come to him through, you know, other ways. He wants us to come to him directly, you know, and have him as we are, you know, as we know him. And that's,
yeah. Well, it's a personal meeting the impersonal, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I mean by no specialness. Another thing that's impacted my life a lot, and I know Baba sort of has kind of warned against too many gurus, you know, and don't, you know, just listen to me and obey me. But A Course in Miracles has really come into my life in a similar way, and I've prayed to Baba so much about that. He's like, man, it's me. Don't worry, it's okay. And for some reason, like I really resonate with that. But it talks about this no specialness thing, and so I think Baba in this divine drama wants us to enjoy the personal aspect of our being, which is his gift to us, but to remember that it all belongs to him and there's only him. And in that sense, there's no division, and how can there be how can there be specialness when we're not even really separate from it? Yeah. But I love what you said about that, because you're right, it is so special. Yeah. Thank you.
Charles, this is Susan. I have a question for you.
Oh, hi, Susan.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about our response to the profound transformation of deprivation. I mean, our society is getting turned upside down, and you mentioned from the quote that we discussed earlier, a little bit of how you deal with it, or how you think about it. But I wondered if you could elaborate on that, because this is something, I think it's unprecedented in our time, the amount of upheaval we're seeing. And it's not just in our country, it's within, you know, throughout the world.
Yeah, and more to come.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, the way I think about it and the way I feel about it may be a little different, but the way I think about it, to the extent I have anything to think of, understanding of it, and I don't, but I mean, I gather from Baba that transformation of consciousness, Baba said something great will happen that has never happened before. You know, he talked about this being the greatest manifestation in, you know, a long period of manifestations. This would be the greatest. Boy, he understated it, you know. So just in the lifetime, or since Mayor Baba was born till today, so much has changed that hadn't changed in thousands of years. I mean, the rapidity of the transformation of consciousness and change has caught us all up in a whirlwind that's hard to even grasp and moves so fast. So with that, of course, Baba indicated would be great upheaval, chaos, confusion, all of which has to be in order for his work to be accomplished. And what a great work. I mean, we see, just my view of it, I'm not sure I'm right about it, but my view of it, you know, we see these transformations in how today, how we're thinking about race. Just, that's, you know, and of course we've gone through other transformations on that, but I think this is even more significant. LGBTQ people. I mean, who would ever have thought, and after thousands of years of one kind of treatment, to be, Christopher and I are married in a church, for gosh sakes. The role of women in society, and on and on and on. For me, it's so much and so big that that we won't be able to grasp it until we look back a long time from now. And so that's necessary, it seems. Baba seems to me to be saying this is all necessary to bring about these change in consciousness that I've come to give. And it may be painful, it is. It may be disruptive, and it is. But it's also extraordinarily beautiful and joyous when you see how people have risen to this occasion and what they do for each other and all of the things that, and how love is being renewed in people. So that's how I think about it. How I feel is, you know, I feel like I know so little about what's happening. And I feel that this is Baba's way of saying, do your best to address whatever you see around you that needs addressing. Do your best. In my case, I think, work for social justice. Work for those things you believe in. Follow your conscience. Do your best. All of this is your opportunity to show how you love me and serve me by loving and serving others who are suffering and struggling. And so, but I also hear Baba saying, and I hear particularly Erich saying, as he probably said to all of you, yeah, do your best. Or as Erich would put it, as you remember, he would say, yeah, do everything as though everything depends on you. But simultaneously know, I do nothing. And that's the opportunity of this moment, is to see if we can do that or come closer to doing it. Erich was like that, as many of you know. He was like that, and how he served Baba, how he took care of Baba. He did it as though everything depended on him. I said, but Erich, if he was God, then, you know, wouldn't it matter if you did this or did? He said, no. He said, that's not it. What if I didn't help him, if he needed help and all that? Of course, I'm going to do that. But I also have to always know I don't do anything. So he said, do that and you will please him. Can you do that? I said, no, but I can try. I can try. He said, that is the spiritual life. Brother, I'm telling you, that is all it is. So that's how I feel about this moment. That it's my opportunity. And see if I can rise to that opportunity. I don't know.
Charles, we're coming to the end of our time, but I did see SJ's hand up. I'm not sure, SJ, if I have your name right. Okay, I saw your hand up before, and I wanted to give you a chance to ask the last question.
Thank you so much. Charles, I have an interesting question that I've been wondering forever and ever. Lola Page talked about it, you mentioned it, and you mentioned that your mom had that experience. I want to know what Baba's smell was like.
What a wonderful question. I say it's a wonderful question because it's probably going to be answered by everyone in a different way. So I only can speak for myself. There was no doubt for me that when I was near him, there was some fragrance was there. And I don't know how to describe, you know, I mean, it was a beautiful fragrance. Some would say, well, Baba, maybe they put perfume on Baba, this, that, and I'm sure they did something or another. I don't know. Baba, you know, maybe they bathed and, you know, whatever. He didn't like bathing, so I don't know. They put something on him. So yeah, it could be, but it was not just when I was up close to him physically. So it wasn't just a scent, you know, like, oh yeah, I smell that. It was more like when I came into proximity, there was some fragrance was there. You could say atmosphere also, but to me, fragrance captures it more because it was palpably Baba. It wasn't anything else. And I don't know who else experienced this or not. I mean, I don't know. And the reason I'm so clear about this is because when Baba left in '58, physically, went back to India, of course, I was very distraught at first. And then I began to walk through the center, think of him and all that. So he was absent, but present. He was absent, but present. And that absence gave me the longing for his presence. And so it was both. But then when we were called, by the time we were called back to India in '62, every day I had, and this is no exaggeration, every day since he left till the day we got word to go back to India in '62, I thought, is he going to call today? Is he going to call us today? Whenever the phone would ring, those were those things that you picked up and off of a receiver, like that. We didn't have anything else. When the phone would ring or a telegram would come, my first thought was always, is Baba calling us? And I don't remember a day when I didn't think this. At the same time, however, I had grown close to Baba between '58 and '62, my Baba. I had grown accustomed to him, you know. He was companion. I felt him. And so when we got up to the cusp of going to India in '62, I suddenly began to get anxious. Excited to see Baba, but anxious to see Baba, if that makes sense. Excited because, of course, I wanted to see him again. Anxious because it began to dawn on me as a 13-year-old, what if Baba isn't my Baba? I mean, you know, what if I get to India and all of this that I have become experienced and feel close to, that's not him. And what to do? So it was both. It was both this great excitement and joy and also this kind of anxiety. And the day we arrived at Guru Prasad, and it was the afternoon, the women went in the morning, Western women, men went in the afternoon that first day. Baba saw us separately. We lined up outside Guru Prasad to go inside. We got closer and closer to the door, and my anxiety level grew a little bit more, as well as my excitement as I got closer to that door. Is it Baba? Is it Baba? You know, Baba was Baba. So I wasn't thinking that I would have to give up my Baba. It was the other way around. You know, I mean, honestly, Baba was Baba. And I didn't intellectualize it. That's just how I felt. I had Baba. So getting up to that door, was it Baba? And I took my shoes off and crossed the threshold, and that fragrance. And he was all the way on the other side of the room. But it was, and again, I can't say what it was. It was a beautiful, sweet, you know, whatever. I can't, was it like flowers? I don't know. It was a fragrance. And I walked into the room as though I were walking into it, like this. And I knew. And just as I was experiencing that, I see his hand shoot up above the crowd standing in front of me. And when I saw that hand, also I knew. So that's how I know, for me at least, he had a fragrance that emanated from him. And that when one, at least my experience, when one came anywhere close in proximity, you were in it and you knew it was Baba. And in my case, I knew it was my Baba. So it was my fragrance. I'm sure others had the same different, you know, I don't know. The fragrance matched me and what I felt. And then, of course, I relaxed completely. I was just at ease and happy, and I waited patiently my turn. I got up to the front of the line. No anxiety, just joy, because I knew it was Baba. And Erich said, Charles Baba. You know, Erich's duty was to say to Baba who each person was as they came up. Baba looked at me and said, how you've grown. And as I went to embrace him, I remembered one thing that I was going to do as soon as I saw him is feel his skin. Because in '58, after he left, I couldn't remember what he felt like. I just couldn't remember that. So I had it in my head. And so maybe it wasn't the most important thing I could have thought of, but as I went to embrace him, I thought, I'm going to feel what he feels like. And I went next to Baba on one side and I rubbed his cheek like this. It was like a baby's skin, you know, it was very soft. Baba liked to be very clean shaven, as you know. So I rubbed his skin. And then I went on the other side and I did it again. Baba looked at me like, what? But when I was there next to him, rubbing his cheek, I did have the presence of mind to whisper into his ear, I love you, Baba. I love you. Which is the first time I had a chance to say it to him. I love you, Baba.
Oh, That is so, so wonderful, Charles. And please agree to come back and do another meeting with us, perhaps at the tail end of the year. There are so many things that I would have liked to ask you. You have written 10 books. You've written a book with other Baba lovers on sexuality and spirituality, and I'm sure that's a deeply fascinating subject for many of us. And we could spend a whole meeting on any one of these topics. So would you please come back to us again in a few months?
Yes, I would be delighted. It's been a joy, and so what a gift for you to want to have me in to listen to my sharing about Baba. It's been a real gift for me. It brings Baba very close. And also just seeing your faces. I'm so touched, you know, and Charlie, and there's Jonathan over there. And I mean, just looking around and seeing there are the Oppenheims, yay. You know, so it's just been there's Fred, and it's just so nice, so nice.
So Baba gives us he gives us a silver lining in this COVID lockdown, in that the technology has really enabled us to come together from coast to coast. Really, we have people from the East Coast, the West Coast, and everywhere in between.
Yeah, very unusual. Yeah.
Charles, is there a Baba prayer that that you like to recite? We often in our study meetings recite the Beloved God prayer, but I would like to defer to you, and perhaps you could recite a prayer that is close to your heart, or maybe all of them are, but one that's especially close to your heart and your practice, in order to bring our meeting to a close as we focus on Beloved Baba.
Well, if you don't mind it being from St. Francis of Assisi, I can do it.
Sure.
Because that's pretty close. I mean, but the reason I love this prayer so much, and Christopher found it for me and sent it to me one day, I love it so much because this prayer is the prayer that Francis prayed before the cross in the church. Many of you know that story, that this is the cross, the crucifix that spoke to him and told him, rebuild my church, which really started his whole journey to be who he was. Anyway, so this is the prayer he would pray in front of that cross. And I also love it so much because in the 12 ways to realize me, they're all impossible. But the last one is doable, although a high bar. If you have that love for me that St. Francis had for Jesus, you will not only realize me, you will also please me. And Mani had that saying from Baba on her wall in her office. So I'll share, I pray this maybe 50 times a day, so. Most high and glorious God, enlighten the darkness of my heart. Give me true faith, certain hope, and the knowledge, wisdom, strength, courage, and love to carry out your most holy and true command.
Thank you so much, Charles.
Charles, Jai Baba.
Thank you all for sharing in this beautiful event. And we'll come together again before too long.
Yes.
Jay Baba.
Jay
Hey,
Baba.
Baba.
Hey, Baba,
Thanks, guys. It was
everyone.
great.
Dear Baba.
Love you.
Jay Baba.
Jay
Hey,
Baba.
Baba.
Love all of you.
Jay Baba.
Jay
Jay
Baba.
Baba.
Hey, Baba.
Jay Baba. Jay Baba. Jay Baba.
Everybody. Hey, Baba.
Jay Baba.
Jay Baba.
Hey,
Jay
dear
Baba.
Baba.
Jay Baba.
Jay
Baba.
Thank
Jay
you.
Baba. Jay Baba, everyone.
Hey, Baba.